How did that happen? No military stopped them. The question is whether there was disloyalty, whether they were not brought in because they were afraid they were not sure which side the military would be on if they brought them in. So who suppressed the rebellion of the attack on Khartoum? The secret police did, NIS, whose loyalty they have a little higher level of support in. Well, this means that the regime acts in a way that's always on the defensive. They met with the military, then they met with youth groups, women's groups, and then most recently there are demonstrations by doctors. Typically, in Sudanese history, governments have been removed by professional groups, labor unions, doctors, lawyers, student groups, university students, and then the military usually moves in and says, all right, you've screwed things up enough, we're replacing you. And sometimes they'll have elections. That's a couple of times they've done that. General Aboud, and then in the mid-'80s that happened to remove the existing government. Numeri was removed by a coup, but only for a year, and then there were elections, and then Sadiq al-Makti took over after he was elected. So the point here is Bashir is very, very nervous right now that he's going to be removed. We should not assume, however, that the new government's going to be better than the old one. I still contend the most dangerous figure in Sudan is not Bashir at all, it's Hassan al-Turabi, who orchestrated the atrocities against the South and is a very dangerous figure. The fourth is the point is the cooperation between the European Union and the United States and Canada. It's very important. When it's done, it does work effectively. I'm not sure I agree with my friend Jan Pronk that we can ever have a unified system in the international world. Why? Because the laws are different in Europe, Canada, and the United States. Just in terms of the structure, there are development agreements that I try to get the Europeans to consider cutting off development assistance and all trade. And it took me a long time to understand. German diplomats explained it to me, EU people, the British did, that there are legal structures in the European Union that make it virtually impossible to do that. And there was no unanimity of opinion in the Council. While there were governments like the British government and the French government and the Nordics and the Dutch who wanted action, the rest of Europe, this was not that important to. I talked to many of them. They said, let's cool this down. It's not that important to us. So Europe was divided on this internally in terms of how aggressive they wanted to be, and that affected what they could do. And it's going to continue to do it because politics is different in all of our countries. That does not mean we should not work to a unified position, because Jan is absolutely correct. They have survived in the North by playing people inside the country and groups against each other, and by playing the donor governments and the Africans. They do the same thing with the Africans, and the Africans know it. They're less naive than we are. We don't even know when we're being manipulated half the time. The last point is the risk of displacement, the issue of displacement. I just finished writing a book that will be published by Oxford in a series, a short history of Sudan. Most of it's, 80% of it's on the last 30 years. And what struck me is how displaced people in Khartoum, have been at risk since independence. Because once the first rebellion started, just a few months before independence, there's been displacement. Displaced people have moved from the south to the north around Khartoum. The maximum number, I think, was 2 or 3 million just at the time of peace. There is still 500,000, 2 million. We're not sure how many. And it's not clear they're all displaced. Many of them were born there. They have fixed houses. They have businesses. Many of them were born in the north. So the notion that these people are all displaced, they're Southerners, who they have not converted to Islam, they are not Arabs, and they don't want to go back to the South because the public services are South are weak, but a huge number have gone back because they're afraid, and there's a reason to be afraid. The northern government has repeatedly engaged in small-scale massacres in the north. There was a massacre of 100 Southerners in the early 1960s of displaced people in Greater Khartoum. There have been riots repeatedly by the Southerners, not just when Garang died, the city was in flames. Darfur displaced people were raping Arab women. Men were raping Arab women who were Darfuri displaced people in Khartoum saying, you did this to our wives and our sisters and our daughters, we are doing this to you now. Southerners were burning Arabs alive. Not many, a few, okay? The point here is there is a reason for the northern Arabs to be nervous. Okay, when Garang came back after being gone for 20 years, 4 million northerners greeted him at the airport. And they were not all southern displaced people. Okay? They don't have a large base of support in the north, and they're very nervous about where the loyalty of the people who live in Khartoum are. And the risk of a massacre, if the city goes up in flames again, is very high. If Rebecca Garang had not gone on the air and said John Garang died from an accident, I don't think she really believes that now, but we asked her to go on. I think other donors did as well, and she did, and that stopped all the rioting after Dr. John was killed in that accident. But it terrified the Arabs, absolutely terrified them. When he came back, they lost control of the city. When he came back after the peace agreement was signed, I'm mixing up sequencing here, they lost control again. They're terrified. So any displaced population with a government that's weak and afraid and under siege will do bad things. It's not just in Sudan. It's in other places as well. We saw what happened in Rwanda. I think there is a high risk. And to the extent we can help displaced people get back to their homes, but we do need, as John said, absolutely correct, is a political settlement to do that.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and many thanks indeed to the Middle East Institute for inviting me. And I very much welcome the aim of this joint project by the Institute and the Foundation for Strategic Research to foster a common vision on addressing humanitarian challenges in Sudan, and in particular the focus of the project on ways of strengthening transatlantic cooperation to this end. I think that the EU-US dimension is particularly important, given that both the US and the European Union are, and some of its member states, are the largest humanitarian donors in Darfur and in Sudan more broadly, that both are witnesses of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement and strongly committed to its implementation, and that both the United States and the European Union are both actively engaged in supporting the Darfur peace process. It's also quite a timely moment to review the scope for EU-US cooperation, as the European Union is in the process of looking at its future strategy to what will be 2 new states. In the case of South Sudan, the European Union and its member states are now trying to develop a comprehensive approach that will bring together the political, security, development and humanitarian strands of our policy, including, we hope, some joint programming of development assistance between the European Union, the Commission and the Member States, and also common messaging on issues such as governance, transparency and accountability. And to balance that, we're also in the process of looking at our future engagement with the North. As we've been asked to address the broader political and security context in this first session this morning, the first thing I wanted to say was that although we've had a successful referendum on South Sudan, clearly huge challenges and uncertainties remain in terms of relations between North and South, internally within the North and within the South, in terms of the next steps on Darfur, and also the impact on Sudan of events in the wider region. The fact that the referendum was held on time, the conduct was largely peaceful, and that it was judged to be credible by international observer groups was a great success. And credit for this is largely due to the Sudanese people themselves. But though this was a Sudanese achievement, I think one factor in the success of the referendum was the fact that the international community, and particularly the United States and the EU, gave clear and consistent messages to both the Sudanese parties